What would you do if the one person you were about to fire was the only one who could save your child? If this is your first time on Top Core, welcome. Hit subscribe now and stay with us. This one cuts deep. They called it the Walters Place, a glass house that sat above Charleston like a failed promise. From the road you could see light spill from its windows, the lawn trimmed like a stage, a fountain that never stopped whispering. Inside, the rooms were big enough to echo a name and not get an answer back. Grace Walters sat on the small rug in her room, knees hugged to her chest, the broken music box beside her. It was the kind of heartache that did not need words. You could feel it in the uncluttered air. Her face was wet with thin tracks of tears that never made a sound in the house. She could not hear. She could not speak. She only knew the language of small hands and slow breaths. The housekeeper had left the note on the hall table that morning. Miss Grace won't touch her food. She says nothing. Notes like that went unread, passed along as routine. The staff had learned to write cruelty into schedules and call it order. No one ran to help. No one knew what to do with silence. On the landing, Richard Walters came down in a suit that wore his shoulders like armor. He moved through the house with the sure step of a man who built neighborhoods from dirt and kept his life tidy in spreadsheets. He had a way of looking at people like they were problems to be solved. Today, his face was tight in a way that meant blame had an address. He opened Grace's door without knocking, and the room flinched. Grace did not look up. She stared at the music box and turned the tiny key with a thumb that trembled. The song came out thin and wrong. The ballerina did not spin. She closed the lid and held the box like a small animal. "What are you doing to my daughter?" he roared, louder than the tile in the hall, louder than the ocean just beyond the glass. His voice split the quiet like a thrown stone. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. In the doorway stood Clara, the maid who often moved like a shadow, carrying a tray of toast and warm milk. She had been with the family long enough to know which curtains to close before storms, which keys opened which cabinets. She looked calm, but her hands were steady because she had practiced steadiness like a craft. Behind her, the house manager, Coleman, watched with a face practiced into impatience. "She won't eat, sir," Clara said in a voice quiet enough to keep trouble at bay. "Miss Grace won't say a word today." Her accent was soft, folded between places she'd lived and places she'd had to leave. He stepped into the room and saw a small chewed edge on a music box. He breathed in and found his anger first. "This," he said to Clara, "is why I don't like people making jokes with her. You cross a line, you will be out the door." His jaw tightened. To him, everything that mattered had to be ordered, checked, and controlled. Grace finally looked up. Her eyes were a small, dark planet. She watched him with the kind of attention that does not need sound to measure a person. Her fingers made a tiny motion, translating a thought she could not say. Richard did not know sign language. None of the people who ran his house did. They read silence as defiance. They read absence as threat. Clara moved an inch closer to the girl and signed slowly, "It's okay." She kept her lips still, careful not to sound the words. The motion was small, a feather of movement that might be missed by anyone who hadn't been taught to see it. Richard's face tightened even further. "What did you just do?" he demanded. He had seen the movement in the doorway and named it a breach. For him, control was safety. Anything outside his rules was a risk to be removed. Clara did not flinch. She answered without words, signing again with patience. "It's okay. Breathe." The motion was softer this time. Her fingers shaped a small home on an invisible air between them. Grace's shoulders eased by a fraction. The world did not change in that moment, but a tiny light had begun. Coleman stepped forward. "Sir, instructions are clear. No unauthorized interaction. You know Mr. Walters' rules." The man loved rules because rules were quiet and predictable. He believed he was saving the child by saving the house. Richard looked from the manager to the maid to the small girl who had been given a name and then a kind of silence. The muscles in his neck moved as if he tried to swallow a story. He was a man who had given away his wife to hospital rooms and had learned to crack his heart into neat pieces he could store in folders labeled business and memories. Then the pieces rattled. He turned away, the suit a dark cut against the light, and said, "Clear the room." His voice had the finality of a judge. Everyone moved like they had been rehearsed to obey. Clara gathered her tray and left as if she had not been the one holding a child's breath steady. But when the door clicked shut, the small change in the room remained. Grace traced Clara's last hand sign slowly, again and again, until her fingers learned the curve. That quiet learning would not stay secret for long. Down the hall, a security camera blinked like a patient eye. In a house that kept secrets behind glass, even a whisper could be recorded. Richard walked out into a day he thought he owned. He did not know what had just been set in motion. Outside, the fountain kept whispering. Inside, a child's silence held a small and dangerous possibility. One small sign could change everything. No one in that house was ready for it. Now. The mansion had no echo because it taught everyone to keep their voices small. Polished floors and glass walls made sound scarce and made emotions easy to measure. People who worked there learned to move quietly, keeping answers short and feeling shorter. The house liked tidy things. Grace's day was a pattern she could read. Morning light on a rug, a blue cup of milk, a pile of books she turned with careful fingers. She watched lips and copied their shapes into a notebook. Her drawings were maps to a world others ignored. The staff called them her little maps and treated them like curiosities to be filed away. Richard moved through the rooms the way he moved through deals. Purposeful, quick, practiced. He had bought and built much of the city. He believed in plans you could measure. After his wife's long illness and death, he had learned a different discipline, to keep feeling in a box and only open it when necessary. That habit cost him the small things that do not show up on reports. The team that ran his household had rules. Mistakes had names. Disobedience had consequences. They followed schedules as if schedules were prayers. The assistant butler, Lee, watched Grace as if she were a bruise he could not touch. "She deserves better than this roof," he whispered once, then moved on. No one argued. They had learned to keep guilt in their pockets because speaking felt like setting a fire. Outside the glass, people admired the Walters name and the buildings his company had raised. Cameras liked his donations. When the flash faded, the house closed back into its neat quiet. Inside that quiet, Grace learned flight patterns. She watched the birds at the fountain and felt their rhythm in her chest. She wound a tiny music box every morning and counted turns until the ballerina stuck. These small rhythms made time readable. One afternoon, Richard stood in a doorway and watched Grace tracing letters with a delicate finger. The sight pressed at a place inside him he had been taught to forget. He decided to check the records. Therapists, appointments, past notes. "Are we doing enough?" he asked the household manager with a voice that sought a ledger answer. The manager offered platitudes. They followed the plan. The tone was calm, but calm could be a way of saying nothing at all. In the staff room, the people who cared for the house sat around a scarred table and shared dinner at night. They stored laughter there like extra blankets. They told stories of family left behind and prayed under their breath. Anna, the cook, hummed a song that had kept children warm in other houses. She made a small bowl and thought to send it up to Grace. Coleman intercepted her at the pantry and said, "Mr. Walters prefers we don't disturb her routine." His words closed the door to small kindnesses. Clara, who had been with the family for years, carried a small notebook full of details no one else noticed. She recorded how Grace turned a page twice, the way the girl tilted her head at certain words, and how she pressed pencil harder when she tried letters. Clara had once lived next to a neighbor who taught a deaf child to sign. The movements had stayed in Clara's hands like a secret. When she had the chance earlier that day, she had signed the simple phrase, "It's okay," and watched the girl's shoulder ease. That night, Clara sat alone by a window with a cup of tea and moved her hands slowly, practicing more signs. She shaped the symbol for home and the symbol for safe, and felt the motion fit like a key. She did not plan to teach anyone. She kept the signs like a private prayer. Yet the memory of the way Grace's fingers had tried to imitate her made Clara's chest ache with something she had not named for a long time. Lee checked the exterior lights and paused by the fountain. He thought of his grandchildren, waiting on a porch he loved. He wondered about the lists and reports that promised care, and whether any paper could replace a hand. He had seen families change when someone stayed past their shift and held a child's hand. He had never been the person who stayed. Across the hall, the portrait of Richard's wife watched like an old promise. The day he lost her, the family learned to speak quieter. The portrait's painted smile reminded him that he had once had warmth he could not buy back. He walked the house and felt a hollow where help might fit. Late, a thin rain moved in from the harbor. The house tightened its windows against the weather. Clara folded her notebook into her apron and stood. She walked to the back gate where deliveries came and staff entered. The night smelled like wet pavement and the sea. She heard a sound, a single, deliberate knock on the outer gate. It was a knock that would not be ignored. Clara stepped forward and peered through the slats. A figure stood under the lamp, coat pulled tight. For a moment, it was only a shadow, and then the shape tilted up into the light. The face she saw at the gate was not one she knew. Clara's breath fogged in the night air. The stranger's eyes were tired but steady, like someone who had learned to wait for mercies. A bag hung. Rain dotted the woman's coat. She lifted her chin as if asking permission. For a moment, the two women measured each other. One used to moving unseen inside halls of power, the other used to walking roads where doors were slammed and kindness was rented. Then the woman said, "I need work, a place to start over." Clara's heart beat against her ribs. She nodded. Slowly. What if silence could scream louder than words? That question haunted every hallway of the Matthews mansion, echoing through glass walls and marble floors. And for the first time, the one who truly heard it wasn't family. It was the maid. Ruth Alvarez had seen wealthy homes before, but the Matthews estate was different. There was something cold beneath the perfection, like beauty hiding rot. When she first arrived for her interview, she noticed no children's laughter, no music, no joy. Just silence, heavy and painful. Mr. Matthews sat behind his glass desk, voice clipped and distant. "We need someone who doesn't just clean," he said, "someone who understands order." Ruth nodded, her hands trembling. "I understand, sir." But she didn't. At least not then. Not until she met her. Eliza Matthews, the billionaire's only daughter, was sitting on the floor of her massive room, coloring in silence. Her drawings were full of crying eyes, broken hearts, and people with no mouths. She was 8, delicate, and breathtakingly beautiful, but completely mute. When Ruth softly greeted her, the girl only looked up, eyes shining with sadness deep enough to drown in. That look pierced Ruth's heart. In her years of cleaning homes for the rich, she'd seen spoiled kids, arrogant kids, but never one so heartbreakingly quiet. Each day, Ruth watched her eat alone, play alone, cry alone. The maids whispered behind her back. Some said the girl was cursed, others said she'd lost her voice in an accident. But Ruth sensed something deeper, something darker. One evening, while Ruth was polishing the silver in the dining hall, she overheard Mr. Matthews speaking to someone on the phone. "I told the doctor no more therapy. It's useless. She'll speak when she wants to." His tone wasn't frustrated, it was guilty. Ruth froze, cloth in hand. What was he hiding? The next morning, she saw bruises, faint, yellowed ones, on the little girl's wrist when she reached for her spoon. Ruth's heart raced, but before she could ask, the girl hid her hand beneath the table. That night, Ruth couldn't sleep. She sat in the small staff quarters, staring at the ceiling, praying. "Lord, if this child's silence means something, show me what it is. Let me be her voice." Days passed. Ruth started leaving small notes under Eliza's door. "Are you okay?" No reply. Then one morning, a note appeared under Ruth's door in shaky handwriting. "He said if I talk, she'll disappear again." Ruth's blood ran cold. She'll disappear again? Who? The mother? A sister? She rushed to Eliza's room after midnight, but the door was locked. She whispered through the keyhole, "Eliza, honey." "Who said that?" Silence. Then a faint sound, a sob, followed by 3 words, scratched on paper pushed under the door. "I saw it." Ruth's knees gave out. What had this child seen? And why did it feel like the entire mansion was hiding it? The sound of footsteps approached, the kind that didn't belong to a child. The door handle turned. Ruth's heart stopped. "Ruth?" The voice was calm, measured. "Mr. Matthews." She stood instantly, heart pounding, pretending to adjust the hallway rug. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his piercing blue eyes studying her face. "No, sir, just couldn't sleep," she stammered. He nodded slowly, almost smiling. "Good. Sleep is important, especially for those who keep secrets." Her breath caught. Did he know? He turned and walked away, leaving behind the faint scent of his cologne and fear. The next morning, Eliza didn't come down for breakfast. Mrs. Caldwell, the head housekeeper, brushed it off. "The girl's with the tutor," she said, but Ruth knew she was lying. There was no tutor that day. She waited until the house quieted, then slipped upstairs. Eliza's room was empty. Her sketchbook sat on the floor, pages ripped out. On the last one, a crayon drawing, a man standing over a woman who had fallen, and a little girl watching. Ruth felt sick. It wasn't just a child's imagination. It was a memory. Suddenly, the door creaked behind her. Mr. Matthews again. "Looking for something, Ruth?" She swallowed hard. "Just tidying up." He stepped closer, voice low. "You're a good worker. Don't start asking questions you don't want the answers to." Then he leaned in. Eliza's silence protects this family. That night, Ruth packed her things, ready to leave. But as she zipped her bag, she saw another note, folded, hidden beneath her pillow. It was written in the same shaky hand. "Don't go. He watches me at night." Ruth froze. She looked toward the hallway mirror, and for just a split second, she swore she saw a figure standing in the reflection. Watching. Her heart pounded. The air felt colder. Somewhere in the dark, the sound of soft sobbing began again, echoing from the vent above her bed. It was Eliza. Ruth climbed onto the chair, pressed her ear to the vent, and whispered, "Eliza, talk to me, baby. I'm here." But instead of words, she heard something else. A recording. A woman's voice, screaming. Then silence. Then Mr. Matthews' voice, calm and deliberate. She saw everything. She can never talk. Ruth stumbled back, gasping, the room spinning. The tape stopped, but the sobbing continued, raw and real this time. Then suddenly the light flickered. The bedroom door slammed shut on its own. And from behind the wall vent, Eliza whispered one word, so faint it was almost a breath. "Run." What would you do if a child's silence held the key to a crime no one dared to speak about? That question kept Ruth awake long after Eliza whispered that chilling word, "Run." But how could she? The thought of leaving that little girl behind felt like abandoning her own soul. She prayed through the night, every second feeling heavier than the last. The mansion creaked around her, whispering secrets that only fear could understand. By dawn, Ruth made a decision. She wasn't running. Not until she knew what happened to that voice on the recording. When the household stirred awake, Ruth slipped into her uniform and moved through the halls like nothing happened. She cleaned, smiled, and nodded as Mrs. Caldwell handed out chores, but her eyes were always watching, ears always listening. While dusting the second-floor hallway, she noticed something odd. The section of wall outside Eliza's room had a faint, uneven outline, as if someone had patched it up quickly. She pressed it, and it gave a soft, hollow sound. Her instinct screamed. Something was in there. Later that night, while everyone was asleep, Ruth returned with a small butter knife she'd hidden from the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she dug gently at the wall's edge. Bits of paint and plaster fell quietly to the floor. Behind it, she found an old notebook wrapped in cloth. Inside were scribbled pages, drawings, half-sentences, and a series of notes written in a woman's hand. The first read, "He promised to change. He lied again. I have to protect her." Another page, "If I disappear, it won't be an accident." Ruth froze. This had to be Eliza's mother. Flipping through, she saw a date, 3 years ago, followed by shaky handwriting. She saw him that night. I think she remembers. Then one page had something that made Ruth's blood go cold. A drawing of the mansion's garden pond, with one line scrawled under it. "Where silence began." Ruth pressed the book to her chest, fighting tears. She needed to get Eliza away from this house, but how? She snuck into the girl's room, gently waking her. "Sweetheart," she whispered. "Did your mom write these?" Eliza nodded, trembling. Ruth cupped her face. "Baby, tell me what you saw. Please." The child hesitated. tears filling her eyes. She picked up her crayon and wrote on the back of a napkin. He pushed her. Ruth's stomach turned. Your father? Eliza didn't nod, but she didn't deny it either. She just hugged Ruth tightly, shaking like a leaf. Suddenly, footsteps thundered in the hallway. Ruth grabbed the notebook and hid it under the pillow. The door opened. It was Mr. Matthews. His face was calm, but his eyes were steel. Why are you in here at this hour, Ruth? She had a nightmare, Ruth said quickly. I came to comfort her. He studied her for a long, dreadful silence, then smiled faintly. You're good with her. Almost too good. But don't forget your place. Ruth forced a smile. Yes, sir. As he left, the air felt colder. Eliza clung tighter, whispering something Ruth could barely hear. It's not just him. Ruth pulled back. What do you mean? But before the girl could write another word, the lights flickered, then went completely dark. Somewhere down the hallway, a door slammed. And in that thick, endless silence, a woman's voice whispered from the vent again, Help her, before it's too late. By morning, Ruth's nerves were unraveling. The notebook sat hidden beneath her mattress like a live grenade. Every creak of the house made her flinch. Every shadow felt like it was watching. She tried to focus on work, polishing the silver, ironing linens, but her eyes kept drifting toward the back garden. The pond. The place where silence began. During lunch, while the staff chatted in the kitchen, Ruth slipped out through the side door, crossing the marble path toward the pond. The air was still, unnaturally quiet. The water shimmered under the sunlight, but there was something wrong about its calmness. Too calm. She knelt beside it, staring into the murky green surface. That's when she saw it, part of a necklace glinting faintly near the bottom. Her breath caught. Could it belong to Mrs. Matthews? She glanced back at the house. No one in sight. She rolled up her sleeve and reached in, fingertips brushing something metallic and cold. Then, splash. A hand grabbed her wrist from below. Ruth screamed, jerking back, but her hand slipped, and she fell into the water. Panic exploded in her chest as she kicked and clawed upward. The hand was gone. She broke the surface, gasping, pulling herself to the edge, coughing violently. When she finally looked down again, nothing. Just the still pond. She stumbled back to her feet, soaked and shaking, her uniform clinging to her skin. But as she turned to leave, she froze. Standing by the garden gate was a man she didn't recognize, dressed in black, watching her. "Who are you?" she shouted, voice trembling. The man didn't answer. He simply pointed toward the pond, then vanished into the trees. Ruth ran back inside, heart pounding, water dripping from her shoes. She went straight to the laundry room to dry off, but something was already waiting for her there. A brown envelope on the counter with her name scrawled on it. She tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. Ruth, leaning over Eliza's bed the night before. Someone had been watching, and beneath the photo, a note. "Touch what's buried again, and you'll join her." Ruth's legs gave out. She slid to the floor, trembling, tears streaming down her face. She knew she was in danger, but she also knew she couldn't stop now. If Eliza's mother really was gone because of something dark, Ruth was the only one left who cared enough to uncover it. That night, she checked on Eliza again. The girl was asleep, clutching a small stuffed bear. On the floor beside her bed lay a torn piece of notebook paper, one word written in a child's handwriting. Tonight. Ruth's pulse quickened. Tonight what? Then she noticed it. Eliza's window was open, curtains blowing gently in the wind, and in the distance the faint beam of a flashlight was moving toward the pond. Someone was already out there. What if the truth you were chasing could get you killed? That question echoed in Ruth's chest as she tiptoed down the back staircase, barefoot, heart thudding in her throat. The mansion was dark, except for the faint glow slipping under the door that led to the garden. She pushed it open quietly and stepped outside. The air was cold, thick with the scent of rain. Somewhere in the distance, frogs croaked, and the ocean waves murmured beyond the cliffs. Then she saw it again. That thin white beam of light weaving between the hedges, moving toward the pond. She ducked behind a rose bush, her breath fogging in the air. The figure holding the flashlight moved with purpose, scanning the ground like he was searching for something buried. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, his face hidden beneath a hat. Ruth reached into her pocket for her phone. Dead. No service. The man stopped suddenly, crouched down, and started digging with a small shovel. Ruth's pulse hammered. What was he looking for? She edged closer, careful not to rustle the leaves. The soil was wet, and her knees sank slightly into the mud. She peered around the tree just in time to see him lift something out of the ground, wrapped in plastic. He brushed dirt off the surface and looked around nervously. Then he opened the bag. Ruth squinted. Inside was something small, a box maybe. He pulled out what looked like an old music box, dented but recognizable, with a ballerina figure inside. He wound it once. It played a haunting tune, soft and broken. Ruth gasped quietly. That was the same tune she'd heard in Eliza's room the night before, the same tune that started right before the voice whispered from the vent. The man snapped his head up, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. Ruth froze. For a few terrible seconds, the light passed inches from her face. Then, it stopped. He was staring directly at her. "Who's there?" His voice was sharp, older, cold. "Come out." Ruth didn't move. Her body screamed to run, but her mind whispered, "Stay quiet." He stepped forward, flashlight aimed straight toward her hiding spot. The light trembled slightly in his hand. "I said come out!" Suddenly, another sound cut through the night, the faint creak of the mansion door. He turned. The flashlight flicked off. And just like that, he vanished into the dark. Ruth stayed crouched for what felt like forever before she dared to move. She crawled toward the pond, heart still thudding. The hole he dug was half open, the plastic bag left behind. She picked up the music box. It was cold and wet, but when she wound it again, the tune played clearer this time. Then she noticed something etched under the lid. A single engraved name. Lydia Matthews. Eliza's mother. Her hands shook. She pressed the lid closed and ran back toward the house, clutching the box like her life depended on it. Inside, the lights flickered, just once, then went out completely. And from upstairs, she heard Eliza screaming without sound. Ruth bolted up the stairs, her wet feet slipping on the marble. She followed the faint sound of movement coming from Eliza's room. The door was open, the curtains blowing like ghosts. Eliza was sitting up in bed, her face pale, her eyes wide. She was shaking violently, pointing toward the corner. Ruth turned. Nothing there, but the air felt wrong, heavy, like it was pressing down on her. She ran to Eliza and pulled her into her arms. "It's okay, baby. It's me. You're safe." Eliza was trembling so hard it felt like she might break apart. She grabbed her notepad and scribbled furiously. "She's back." Ruth's voice caught. "Who?" Eliza pointed to the vent. Ruth hesitated, then walked toward it. The vent was old, rusted slightly around the edges. She knelt down and listened. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, came the sound of someone humming, the same tune from the music box. Ruth's throat tightened. "Oh, Lord." She looked back at Eliza. The little girl's eyes were full of tears. She made a sign with her hands, slow, deliberate. Ruth had seen that sign before. It meant mother. The humming stopped. Silence filled the room. Then, a single word whispered through the vent. "Truth." Ruth stumbled back, heart pounding. "You heard that too, right?" she whispered, even though Eliza couldn't hear her. Eliza wrote again, hands shaking. She said he lied. Ruth held her close. "We're getting out of here, sweetheart, right now." But when she reached for the door, it wouldn't open. The knob twisted but didn't budge, locked from the outside. She banged on it, shouting, "Hello, somebody help, open this door." No answer. Only the faint patter of rain beginning to fall outside. Then, footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming down the hall. Eliza clung to her tightly, burying her face in Ruth's shoulder. Ruth pressed her ear against the door. The footsteps stopped right outside. Then came a man's voice, cold and calm. "Ruth, I need you to step away from the child." Mr. Matthews. Ruth froze. "What are you doing? Why are we locked in here?" "It's for everyone's safety," he replied. "You've been snooping where you shouldn't." She backed away, clutching Eliza tighter. You're scaring her." "She was already scared," he said quietly. "You think I don't see it? You think I don't know what she remembers?" Ruth's blood went cold. "What are you talking about?" A pause. Then softly, "She saw the accident, but it wasn't an accident." Ruth's knees weakened. "You killed her?" Silence. Then the sound of the lock clicking. The door opened an inch. Mr. Matthews stood there, eyes hollow, face pale. Rain dripped from his coat. "You shouldn't have found that notebook," he said. "Now you've put us all in danger." Ruth stepped back, shielding Eliza. "From who?" Before he could answer, the lights went out again. A flash of lightning illuminated the hallway, and standing behind him for a split second was a woman's silhouette, drenched and still. The thunder crashed. The light vanished. When the lights flickered back on, Mr. Matthews was gone. Only the wet footprints remained, leading back toward the pond. The world stopped spinning for Ruth. Her throat went dry, her heart pounding in her ears. Coleman's voice echoed again, soft, almost regretful. "Ruth, Eliza is your daughter." She shook her head instantly. "That's impossible." But deep down, something inside her broke open. A locked memory she'd buried for years. Coleman stepped closer. "You worked for the Matthews before, didn't you? 8 years ago." Ruth's voice cracked. "Only for a few months. I was a nanny. Lydia, she was pregnant." He nodded. "And she wasn't the only one." The room tilted. Ruth gripped the edge of the table to stay upright. "What are you saying?" "You got pregnant too. Richard knew. He had you sent away quietly before Lydia found out. You lost everything. Your job, your name, your baby. They told you she died." Ruth's chest tightened. "You're lying." Coleman shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am. Richard took that baby and raised her as Lydia's, said it would protect his reputation. Nobody could ever know Lydia wasn't able to have children." Tears streamed down Ruth's face before she could stop them. She looked down at Eliza, the same almond eyes, the same small birthmark under her chin she'd always found familiar. Her knees gave out. "My God." Eliza reached out, touching Ruth's face, confused but gentle, as if she sensed something powerful had just changed. Ruth held her, sobbing softly into her hair. Every night she'd prayed for closure, for peace, never imagining the answer was standing right in front of her all along. Coleman's voice broke the silence. "They'll come for you, Ruth. That letter and that locket, they prove everything. Richard's empire would crumble if the truth got out." Ruth wiped her tears, her sadness turning to steel. "Then let it burn." Before she could move, headlights cut through the windows again. A car pulling back into the driveway. Richard was back. Coleman panicked. "You need to go now." Ruth scooped Eliza into her arms and ran toward the kitchen door. But before she could reach it, Richard's voice thundered from the front of the house. "Ruth!" She froze. His silhouette appeared in the doorway, soaked in rain, blood seeping through his shirt. His eyes were wild, desperate. "You think you can steal my family from me?" he hissed. Ruth turned slowly, holding Eliza tight. "You stole her from me first." Richard stepped forward, trembling with rage. "You don't know what I did to protect this family." Coleman moved between them. "Sir, it's over. Let them go." Richard's hand lifted, the gun still in it. "Move, Coleman." Coleman hesitated, then shook his head. "Not this time." The gun went off. Once. Then silence. Coleman fell. Ruth screamed, clutching Eliza close as Richard pointed the gun at her next. "You were never meant to be part of this story, Ruth," he whispered. Neither was she. But before he could fire, Eliza stepped between them. Her tiny hand lifted the locket, her notepad in the other. She wrote quickly, her tears dripping onto the paper. "You're not my daddy." The words hit him harder than any bullet could. Richard's hand trembled. The gun slipped. He dropped it and fell to his knees. For the first time, the billionaire looked small, broken, and when he finally looked up, his voice cracked like a child's. "I just wanted her to love me." Ruth knelt beside Eliza, wrapping her arms around her. "She doesn't need lies to love you. she whispered. She needs truth. Lightning flashed again, and everything that had been hidden in that house finally came into the light. It took hours before the sirens arrived. By then, Richard Matthews was sitting quietly on the marble floor, his gun gone, his empire in ruins. The police led him away without resistance. He didn't fight. He didn't beg. He just whispered one thing to Ruth as he passed. Take care of her. Ruth stood on the porch, holding Eliza close as the rain softened to a drizzle. The morning light broke through the clouds, painting the mansion gold for the first time in years. For the first time, it felt like that house could breathe. Detectives asked questions, took statements, sealed evidence. The letter, the locket, Coleman's body covered gently with a white sheet. Justice had come, but it had come at a price. Eliza leaned into Ruth's chest, still silent, but no longer broken. Ruth kissed her forehead. Everything's gonna be all right now, she whispered. You're home, baby. You're finally home. Eliza pulled out her notepad and began to write. When she turned it around, Ruth's tears came all over again. Mommy? Ruth smiled through her tears. Yes, sweetheart. Mommy. The sun broke fully through the clouds then, bright, gentle, and full of promise. And as they walked down the long driveway hand in hand, Ruth knew the truth had set them both free. That mansion, the same one that once held secrets, screams, and ghosts, now stood silent. But this time that silence was peace. 2 weeks later, the Matthews mansion stood empty. Reporters came and went. Headlines screamed of betrayal, secret heirs, and the downfall of a billionaire. But Ruth and Eliza were long gone, far from the flashing cameras and judgmental whispers. They'd moved into a quiet neighborhood in Savannah, Georgia, where the air smelled of magnolias and freedom. The house was small, creaky floors, peeling paint, but it was alive. It had laughter now, even if Eliza's was silent. Every morning, Ruth watched her draw. Eliza filled her sketchbook with strange, vivid pictures. A woman crying near a river, a baby wrapped in a blanket, and sometimes a man standing in the rain holding a gold locket. Ruth thought it was just grief expressing itself. But then came the nightmares. Eliza would wake up screaming, though no sound came out, her lips open, her hands trembling. Ruth would rush in, hold her tight, whispering prayers into her hair. Shh, baby. It's just a dream. Mommy's here. But one night, Ruth noticed something chilling. Eliza's drawings started to predict things before they happened. One morning, Eliza sketched a bird crashing into their kitchen window. Hours later, it happened. Another day, she drew a police car outside their house. And that evening, 2 detectives came knocking. Detective Avery, the same one from the mansion case, stood at the door, hat in hand. Mrs. Cole, he said softly, we found something in Richard's study. Ruth's stomach dropped. What is it? He held out a sealed envelope. He wrote this before he was taken into custody, addressed to you. Ruth hesitated, her hands shaking as she tore it open. Inside, she found a short letter, written in Richard's neat, cold handwriting. Ruth, I'm sorry for what I took from you, but the truth you found isn't the whole truth. Eliza was meant to be yours, but not from this world alone. Look deeper, and you'll understand why she never speaks. Ruth's skin crawled. What does that mean? She whispered. Detective Avery shrugged. We were hoping you'd know. That night, Ruth couldn't sleep. She sat beside Eliza's bed, watching her breathe, her small fingers clutching the locket as she dreamed. The house creaked, the wind whispered through the trees. And then, Eliza mumbled something in her sleep. It was faint, barely a sound. But it was there, a single word. Mommy. Ruth's heart froze. She leaned in closer. Eliza stirred, her eyes flickering open. Did you just... Ruth began, but the girl suddenly looked past her, toward the corner of the room. There was no one there. Yet Eliza lifted her hand slowly, pointing into the shadows, and then she wrote a single word on her notepad. She's here. The next morning, Ruth tried to shake it off. She told herself it was trauma, that Eliza's mind was just finding ways to heal. Kids imagined things. That's what therapists always said. But when she went into the kitchen, she saw the locket lying open on the table. Inside, it wasn't just her and Eliza's picture anymore. There was a third face, a woman's, blurred but familiar. Ruth stumbled back, gasping. No, that can't be. She tried to remember where she'd seen that face before. It wasn't Lydia. It wasn't her mother. Then it hit her. It was the nurse who'd been with her the night she gave birth, the one who vanished before Ruth was told her baby didn't make it. The nurse named Mara. Ruth's mind spun. Why was her picture inside the locket now? She grabbed the phone and called Detective Avery. I need you to run a name, she said. Mara Kelson. She worked at St. Anne's Hospital 8 years ago. There was silence on the other end, then a slow exhale. Mrs. Cole. Are you sure about that name? Yes. Why? He hesitated. Because Mara Kelson was found dead that same year. Suicide, the same night your baby was declared stillborn. The world tilted again. Ruth hung up, shaking, her breath catching in her chest. Later that night, while washing dishes, she caught a glimpse of something in the kitchen window. A figure standing in the yard. A woman. Pale dress. Long dark hair. Ruth dropped the glass, heart pounding, and rushed outside. But when she opened the door, the yard was empty. Just the sound of wind and cicadas. Then Eliza appeared in the doorway, clutching her notepad. She'd drawn something new, the same woman from the locket, standing under a tree, with Eliza. Beneath the drawing, she'd written 3 chilling words. She's my voice. Ruth's knees nearly gave out. What do you mean, baby? Who is she? Eliza looked up, her eyes glassy, her small hand trembling as she wrote again. She talks when I can't. The room grew colder. The air thickened, heavy with something unseen. Ruth whispered, Oh God. What did Richard mean when he said, not from this world? Eliza didn't answer, but the locket on the counter snapped shut on its own, with a sound that echoed through the whole house. And outside, in the reflection of the window, the woman was standing there again, smiling faintly at the child she'd once sworn to protect. It was almost midnight in Savannah. The rain tapped gently against the window, a calm rhythm that masked the unease in Ruth's heart. Eliza had finally fallen asleep after hours of restless tossing. The drawing still sat on her bedside, the one of the woman in white under the tree. Ruth couldn't stop staring at it. The face, gentle yet haunting, looked too familiar, too alive. Something deep inside her whispered that this wasn't just grief or imagination. It was connection. She picked up the locket from the table, gripping it tightly. Who are you, Mara? She whispered. The clock ticked, the lights flickered, and for the briefest second, Ruth heard a whisper, faint but clear. She's never alone. Ruth froze. The voice didn't come from Eliza's room. It came from behind her. She turned sharply. No one. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the flickering bulb above her. Her mind raced. Get a grip, Ruth, she muttered. You're just tired. She walked down the hall to check on Eliza. The girl was still asleep, her small chest rising and falling. Ruth exhaled until she saw Eliza's hand twitching, moving like she was signing in her sleep. Grace, she signed. Mother. Don't cry. Ruth's heart sank. Those were the signs she used to practice with her son, years before he was taken. She sat beside Eliza, trembling. How do you know that? She whispered. Eliza's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they looked different, older, wiser. Mara says you forgot, she signed slowly, almost as if she wasn't the one controlling her hands. Ruth backed away, her throat tightening. Who's talking to you, baby? Eliza looked toward the window again. The reflection showed them both, and behind them faintly a woman's silhouette standing in the dark rain. The power suddenly cut. The house went black. Eliza began to cry silently, clutching her locket. Ruth ran to her, holding her tight. It's okay, honey, Mommy's here. Then, the radio crackled. It had been broken for months, but now, through static, a woman's voice emerged. You were never meant to leave her. Ruth screamed and yanked the plug from the wall, her heart pounding. The rain intensified outside, thunder rumbling like an angry god. She called Detective Avery again, her voice shaking. Something's wrong. She's seeing someone, hearing things. I think that nurse, Mara, is trying to talk to her. Mrs. Cole, Avery replied firmly. We already checked every record. Mara Kelson's been dead 8 years. You need rest. Grief can do strange things. No, Ruth snapped. This isn't grief. She talks to her. She signs things I never taught her. Avery sighed. I'll come by in the morning. Try to get some sleep. But Ruth couldn't. Hours passed. The house stayed dark, and just when she began to drift off, she heard something that froze her blood, a soft humming from Eliza's room. It was the same lullaby Mara used to sing at the hospital. Ruth rushed in and gasped. Eliza was sitting up, humming though she couldn't speak, and her locket was glowing faintly blue. Baby, stop, please stop, Ruth begged. But Eliza just looked at her, eyes glassy, tears streaming. She said I have to help her, Eliza signed. Help who? Ruth asked. The one under the tree. Ruth felt the air go cold. She turned toward the window, and there, beneath the oak tree, lightning flashed, revealing a figure half buried in the dirt. Ruth's knees buckled. Her body shook violently as she whispered, What did you do, Richard? She didn't know it yet, but the secret beneath that tree would shatter everything she believed about life, death, and motherhood. By sunrise, Detective Avery's car pulled into the muddy driveway. Ruth met him outside, soaked and pale, pointing toward the tree. She's out there, Ruth said. I saw her, under the ground. Avery frowned. Who's under the ground? Mara Kelson, Ruth whispered. The nurse who took my baby, the one Richard said wasn't from this world. He hesitated, watching her trembling hands. Mrs. Cole, if this is about... But she cut him off, shouting, Just dig! Avery exchanged a look with his partner. After a long pause, he sighed. Get a shovel. The first few scoops of dirt were just mud and roots. Then came something else. Fabric. White fabric. Ruth gasped. I told you. Avery knelt, brushing away the soil. And there it was, a piece of an old hospital gown. The initials stitched faintly on the collar read MK. His face went pale. Oh my God. They called for a forensic team immediately. Within an hour, the yard was swarming with investigators, floodlights, and camera flashes. The small Savannah home turned into a scene straight out of a nightmare. Ruth sat on the porch clutching Eliza, who watched in eerie silence. Avery approached slowly. They found a woman's remains, he said quietly. Buried for almost 8 years. DNA will take time, but I think you were right. Ruth's hands shook. Richard killed her, didn't he? She knew about the baby. Avery hesitated. Maybe. Or maybe she tried to stop him. He crouched, lowering his voice. You need to understand something. Richard's business empire wasn't clean. Real estate, charity fronts. He was moving money overseas. Maybe Mara found something she wasn't supposed to. Ruth stared at him, numb. And he buried her here? On the same land where he built a home for me and Eliza? Avery nodded grimly. Because monsters hide their sins where they feel safest. Later that evening, the investigators left. Ruth tucked Eliza into bed, praying softly. God, please let her rest. Don't let this darkness touch her again. But as she turned to leave, Eliza grabbed her wrist, her eyes wide, terrified. She's awake, she signed. Ruth frowned. Who? Eliza pointed toward the window, toward the oak tree where the earth was freshly turned. Ruth's breath caught in her throat. The soil was moving, no wind, no rain. But the earth trembled, as if something beneath it was breathing. Ruth ran outside, barefoot, rain hitting her face. Stop! Whoever you are, stop! She shouted. The ground cracked open slightly, revealing something silver, the edge of another locket, identical to Eliza's. She picked it up, hands shaking. Inside was a photo, Ruth, Mara, and baby Eliza. Before she could process it, the voice came again, echoing softly through the rain. You were never meant to forget. Ruth fell to her knees, sobbing. The truth began to dawn. Mara hadn't stolen her baby. She had saved her. And Richard had buried that truth, and Mara, to protect his empire. From the window above, Eliza watched silently, tears streaming down her cheeks. She signed something slowly, her hands trembling. She's not gone, Mom. Ruth looked up, whispering, What do you mean? Lightning flashed. And for an instant, the woman in white stood beside the tree again, watching over them both. And then she vanished. The only sound left was the rain, and the faint hum of a lullaby that should have died 8 years ago. The next morning broke heavy with gray clouds. The world outside Ruth's window looked like it was holding its breath. The police had sealed off the yard, but the whispers had already spread through Savannah like wildfire. A woman's body found buried behind the mansion, once owned by billionaire Richard Cole, counter, her hands trembling around a cup of untouched coffee. The TV in the corner buzzed with breaking news. Authorities confirm skeletal remains have been recovered from the property formerly owned by the late Richard Cole. Investigators believe the death could be linked to an 8-year-old disappearance of nurse Mara Kelson. Her knees almost gave way at the sound of that name. Eliza sat at the table, drawing silently. But something about her movements seemed too calm, too knowing. She was sketching that same woman again, standing under the oak tree. Only this time, she drew her smiling. Ruth whispered, "Baby, how do you know what she looks like?" Eliza shrugged, signing, "She talks to me when I sleep." The words sent chills racing down Ruth's spine. Before Ruth could respond, her phone rang. It was Detective Avery. "Mrs. Cole, I need you to come down to the station," he said, voice tight. "It's about Richard." Ruth hesitated. "What about him?" "He's dead." "Just come," Avery said quietly. When Ruth arrived, she found Avery sitting with a man she didn't recognize. Tall, pale, wearing a gray suit. His hands were neatly folded, but his eyes gave off the kind of emptiness you only see in people who've lived through too many secrets. "This is Graham Walters," Avery said. "He was Richard's financial advisor and business partner." Ruth's chest tightened. "What does this have to do with me?" Graham leaned forward. "Everything, Mrs. Cole. You see, Richard wasn't just your husband. He was also my biggest mistake." He opened a folder and slid several photos across the table. They showed Richard shaking hands with politicians, signing property deeds, and... Ruth gasped. One photo showed Richard standing beside Mara Kelson, smiling. "You told me he barely knew her," Ruth said sharply. Graham sighed. "That's what he told everyone. But Mara wasn't just a nurse. She was his research partner. They were developing a hearing implant for children. The project was meant to help deaf kids worldwide. But when the tests went wrong, one child died, and Richard paid to bury the story." Ruth froze. "Dear God." Mara threatened to expose him. She filed a report, but before it reached the press, she vanished. He told the world she left the country. Ruth shook her head, tears brimming. "So he killed her?" Avery glanced down. "We can't confirm that yet, but the burial site was on his land. It's looking bad." Ruth whispered, "And the baby?" Graham frowned. "What baby?" Ruth's voice cracked. "Our daughter, Eliza." Graham hesitated, confusion turning to realization. "You don't know, do you?" Her eyes narrowed. "Know what?" He opened another file, adoption papers with forged signatures, the biological mother's name, Mara Kelson. Ruth's heart stopped. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "That's not possible. I carried Eliza. She's my daughter." Graham looked at her softly. "Richard falsified everything. Mara's baby was born premature. When she died, he switched the birth records to protect himself. He made it look like Eliza was yours." Ruth stared blankly at the paper. The room spun. "You're lying," she said, backing away. Avery tried to steady her. "Ruth, listen." "No," she screamed. "You're telling me my baby isn't mine?" Silence. The only sound was the ticking clock and Ruth's ragged breathing. Finally, Graham said quietly, "You loved her like a mother. That's all that matters." But Ruth wasn't hearing it. She walked out, numb, her mind spinning with memories that no longer made sense, Eliza's eyes that didn't match hers, the strange lullaby she never taught her, the way she signed words no one had shown her. She reached her car and slammed her fists against the steering wheel. "He lied to me," she whispered. "He took everything from me, even my child." That night, she sat on Eliza's bed, watching her sleep. The girl's face was peaceful, innocent, unaware of the storm around her. Ruth brushed her hair gently and whispered, "No matter what anyone says, you're mine." Then suddenly, Eliza opened her eyes. "Mom?" she signed. Ruth froze. "Yes, baby?" Eliza's lip quivered. "There's someone outside." Ruth turned to the window and saw a shadow standing by the oak tree, tall and still. Lightning flashed, and for an instant, it wasn't a ghost. It was a man. A man she thought was dead. "Richard." Ruth's scream tore through the night. She stumbled backward, grabbing Eliza into her arms. Her heart pounded so hard it drowned out every other sound. "No, no, no," she whispered. "He's gone. He's dead." But there he was, Richard Cole, standing under the same tree where Mara's body had been found, rain soaking his suit, his face pale as bone. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood watching the house like a man waiting for something he already knew was coming. Ruth grabbed the phone and called Avery, shouting, "He's here! He's outside my house!" Avery's voice came through, urgent. "Lock the doors! Stay inside! We're on our way!" But when she turned back to the window, he was gone. Ruth held Eliza tight. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's got you." Minutes crawled by like hours. The storm raged. Then, a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. Ruth crept forward, whispering, "Who's there?" No answer. Another knock. Louder this time. "Stay here," she told Eliza, her voice trembling. She grabbed a kitchen knife, walking toward the sound. The air smelled of wet wood and electricity. The doorknob rattled. "Ruth," came a voice from the other side, calm, deep, unmistakable. "Open the door. We need to talk." Ruth gasped. It was him. "Richard?" she whispered. "I never meant for you to find her," he said through the door. "You weren't supposed to see that." Tears streamed down her face. "You killed her, didn't you?" Silence. Then, "I did what I had to do." Ruth's rage broke through her fear. She yanked the door open, but no one was there. Only the sound of the wind and a muddy trail of footprints leading toward the oak tree. She stepped outside, barefoot, rain slapping her skin. "Show yourself, coward!" Lightning flashed, and she saw him standing behind the tree now, watching her with hollow eyes. "Why, Richard?" she screamed. "Why her? Why the lies?" He stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Because she was going to take you both away from me. I couldn't lose everything again." "Everything?" Ruth shouted. "You buried a woman. You buried your own daughter's mother." He hesitated. "She wasn't supposed to die." Ruth took another step. "You told me she abandoned us." Richard's expression twisted in pain. "I was trying to protect our family." "Our family?" she spat. "You stole a baby that wasn't mine and killed her real mother." Richard's voice broke. "I didn't steal her. I saved her. Mara was going to sell the child to pay for her debts. I stopped her." Ruth froze. "What?" He nodded, desperate. "She wasn't a saint, Ruth. She was dangerous. I tried to fix it, to give that child a life. With you." Her mind whirled. Lies layered on lies. But something about his face, that broken guilt, made her hesitate. "You're lying," she said again, though softer now. He shook his head. "You can hate me. I deserve it. But I didn't kill her." "Then who did?" A sound echoed behind her, the creak of the front door. Ruth turned. Eliza was standing there, tears running down her face, clutching her glowing locket. She signed slowly. "He's not lying." Ruth looked back toward Richard, but he was gone, vanished into the storm. Only the muddy footprints remained. Ruth fell to her knees, sobbing. The wind howled through the trees, as if carrying voices of the past. Eliza walked to her, pressed the locket into her hand, and signed, "She wants you to see." The locket clicked open, and inside was a second photo Ruth had never seen before. Mara, holding baby Eliza, beside Richard. The truth hit like a blow. Richard hadn't stolen the baby. He and Mara had once loved each other, and Ruth, the woman he married, was just the cover story for a past that never died. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Oh God, what have you done to us?" Thunder roared across the sky, drowning out Eliza's sobs. And far in the distance, the old oak tree groaned as its roots began to split. revealing something else buried deep below. Something that still moved. The storm had passed, but the air still felt heavy, like the earth itself had secrets it didn't want to keep. By morning, the old oak tree had split completely down the middle, its roots torn apart. Police surrounded the backyard again, digging carefully while reporters swarmed outside the gate, their cameras flashing against the yellow tape. Ruth stood on the porch with Eliza, wrapped in a blanket. The little girl hadn't spoken all night, not even through her signs. She just stared at the tree like she knew what was coming. Detective Avery approached quietly. His voice was low. "Ruth, we found something else." Her stomach clenched. "What?" He motioned for her to follow. As they walked closer, Ruth's heart pounded harder. Buried beneath the oak's roots was an old chest, wooden, half-rotted, but sealed tight. The forensics team cracked it open. Inside were stacks of photos, letters, and 2 old cassette tapes. Ruth's hand shook as she picked one up. Written in faded ink, "To whoever finds this, the truth." Avery looked at her. "We'll have this analyzed, but you might want to hear it yourself." She nodded, her throat dry. They brought the tape inside and set up an old player. When the recording started, a woman's trembling voice filled the room. "If you're listening, my name is Mara Kelson. I worked for Richard Cole. I never meant for any of this to happen," Ruth gasped, covering her mouth. Eliza clung tighter to her arm. "Richard wasn't evil," Mara continued. "He was lost. We fell in love, and I got pregnant. But when our project failed and a child died, he changed. He became obsessed with control. I told him I'd leave. I told him I'd take our baby. That night, he came to me, begging. We fought. I fell." The tape crackled. Then silence. Ruth pressed rewind, desperate for more. The tape played again, continuing in a faint whisper. "He didn't kill me on purpose, but he buried me, because he couldn't face what he'd done. If my child survives, tell her she's loved. Tell her her name was never meant to be hidden." Ruth sat frozen, tears spilling freely. Avery looked down, speechless. So Richard hadn't murdered her in cold blood. It was a tragedy, a cover-up, but not what she had feared. Eliza looked up, eyes wet, and signed slowly. She forgives him. Ruth hugged her tight, whispering, "And so do I." But forgiveness didn't erase the damage. News broke within hours. Every major network carried the story. The billionaire's secret life, murder, lies, and a hidden daughter. By evening, reporters had surrounded the property. Ruth couldn't even leave for groceries. And then, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside, a single sentence. "I'm still alive." Her blood ran cold. She turned it over, stamped in fresh ink with Richard's initials. R.C. That night, Ruth didn't sleep. She sat in the dark, watching the tree sway in the wind, the police lights flashing faintly from the street. Then she saw movement, a figure near the gate. She stepped closer to the window. It was him again, Richard. This time, he didn't hide. He stood under the porch light, soaked in rain, holding something wrapped in plastic, a folder. Ruth slowly opened the door, keeping her distance. "You should be in prison," she said quietly. He nodded. "I know. But before I turn myself in, you need to see this." He handed her the folder. Inside were medical reports, DNA results, and one photograph of Mara in a hospital bed, holding baby Eliza. "She died that night," Richard said softly. "But she made me promise to protect Eliza. That's why I hid everything. I didn't kill her. I covered up her death to save the project, to keep her name clean. I couldn't let her be remembered as a scandal." Ruth's voice cracked. "You destroyed your family to save your image." He nodded again, tears glistening. "You're right, I lost everything. I thought money could erase guilt. But every night I saw her face, and the little girl who would one day learn the truth." He looked at Eliza, who stood behind the glass door, watching silently. "She's the only thing pure that came out of my sins," Richard whispered. "Take care of her." Ruth's lips trembled. "What are you going to do?" He stepped back toward the gate. "Face it, all of it." And before she could speak again, he was gone, walking into the flashing red lights of the police cars pulling up the driveway. Ruth sank to the ground, crying into her hands as the sirens wailed. Eliza came to her, placing the locket in her palm once more. Inside, the picture of Mara and Richard smiled faintly, faded by time. For the first time, Ruth didn't feel anger, only release. She whispered to the night, "Let it end here." But in Savannah, stories like this never really end. Because the next morning, the chest under the oak wasn't empty anymore. Someone had placed a new tape inside, labeled, "For Eliza, when she's ready." A year later, the mansion was gone. Ruth sold the property to a charity foundation that turned it into a home for abandoned children. The same kind Richard had once claimed to help. The oak tree remained, standing tall in the middle of the yard like a grave and a guardian at once. Ruth now lived quietly in Atlanta with Eliza. Their house was smaller but warm, full of light and laughter. Every morning, Ruth packed Eliza's school bag, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You're loved, baby. Always." Eliza's therapy had worked miracles. She had regained partial hearing in one ear thanks to a new implant. Ironically, the same technology Richard and Mara had once created. Sometimes Ruth wondered if that was God's way of healing what man had broken. One evening, Ruth sat at the piano, playing softly. Eliza stood beside her, signing along to the melody. It was peaceful, until the mailman arrived with a small box addressed to Eliza Cole. Ruth hesitated, heart fluttering. Who could this be from? They opened it together. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "From your father. Play it when you're ready. R." Eliza looked at her mom, then nodded. They plugged it into the laptop. A video loaded. Richard, older, tired, sitting in what looked like a prison chapel. "Eliza," he said, voice trembling. "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know, you were the only thing I ever did right. Your mother, Mara, wanted you to have the world. Ruth gave you her heart. Between them, you became everything good I could never be." He paused, tears streaking his face. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that love doesn't die in silence. It grows louder in those who keep believing." The screen flickered. Then the video ended. Eliza sat there, staring. Slowly, she removed the locket from her neck, opened it, and placed the USB beside it. She signed softly. He finally told the truth. Ruth smiled, eyes wet. "Yes, baby." He did. Outside, thunder rolled, not in warning this time, but like a heartbeat. Ruth stood by the window, looking out at the rain. For the first time in years, she didn't feel fear. She felt grace. Eliza came beside her, pressing her small hand into hers. "Mom," she whispered, her first real word since the accident. Ruth gasped, eyes wide. "What did you just say?" Eliza smiled faintly. "Mom." Ruth broke down, hugging her tight. Outside, the rain slowed to a soft drizzle. The oak tree swayed gently, its leaves whispering like voices of those long gone. Mara, Richard, and all the lost children who never had a chance. But now, under that tree, new life had begun. Children played there, laughing, running barefoot across the wet grass, their laughter echoing where once there had been silence. And through it all, Ruth's voice carried softly in prayer. Not for revenge, not for pity, but for peace. "Lord, thank you for turning pain into purpose." As the sun broke through the clouds, Eliza raised her face to the light and signed one final time. "We're free." The camera pans up, over the mansion's ruins, over the children's laughter, up to the sunlight breaking through the storm. As Ruth's voice fades, "If this story reached you today, remember, silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it's where grace begins." If this story moved your heart, don't scroll away. Subscribe to Top Core, where every story reminds us that love, justice, and faith can still rise from the ashes.